what if trying to calm down during a massive panic attack is, like, actually the exact thing making it worse?
Oh, totally. I mean, it's completely counterintuitive, but it's true.
Right. Because, well, think about it. We've all had those days where our feelings don't just gently wash over us. They hit with the force of an absolute tsunami.
A massive wave just, sweeps you right off your feet.
Exactly. And suddenly you're just drowning in your own psychological response. And what do most of us do? We fight it. We try to suppress it.
Which, clinically speaking, acts like a pressure cooker. When you suppress those immense waves, the psychological and physical tension just builds up.
Until the next wave comes back twice as high.
Yeah, and it's terrifying. And if it happens often enough, you understandably just become afraid to feel anything at all.
And that is exactly the core of what we're unpacking today on this deep dive. So, welcome. Whether you're a medical student navigating the relentless pressure of the wards, or, a young professional managing a toxic workplace.
Or just someone trying to understand your own nervous system, honestly.
For sure. Our mission today is to get into the science of emotional survival. We are comprehensively summarizing a brilliant book called the Dialectical Behavior Therapy Skills Workbook.
Right, written by Matthew McKay, Jeffrey C. Wood, and Jeffrey Brantley.
Yeah, and it's based on the foundational framework originally developed by Marshall Linehan called Dialectical Behavior Therapy, or DBT.
Which is essentially a highly structured, scientifically backed toolkit to manage severe distress without losing your mind.
But before we get to those tools, let's look at that word dialectical. In a clinical setting, what does that actually mean?
So the concept of the dialectic is all about holding two seemingly contradictory truths in your mind at the exact same time.
Without your brain just totally short-circuiting.
Exactly. And the core dialectic here is this: completely accepting yourself exactly as you are in this present moment while simultaneously committing to changing your destructive behaviors.
Okay, so it isn't an either-or situation. You don't have to, hate yourself to change.
No, not at all.
And accepting yourself doesn't mean you just shrug and keep making bad choices.
Right. It's acceptance and change. Both are true. The entire clinical framework is built on this balance.
Which gives us a pretty clear roadmap for this deep dive, going through the 4 core pillars of DBT: distress tolerance, mindfulness, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness.
It's a journey from total crisis back to a healthy baseline, and eventually out into healthy relationships.
So let's start right at the bottom of that valley, the crisis. Distress tolerance. Okay, let's unpack this. When the alarm bells in your brain are ringing at maximum volume, you can't just sit down and logically puzzle your way out of a problem.
Because biologically, you are in pure survival mode. During an acute emotional crisis, your amygdala, which is, the brain's threat detection center, essentially hijacks the whole operation.
It just takes over.
Yeah. It perceives a threat, floods your body with adrenaline and cortisol, and forces your prefrontal cortex offline.
And the prefrontal cortex is what handles logic and reasoning, right?
Exactly. So you literally do not have the neurological hardware available to be reasonable in that exact moment.
Which means the goal in a crisis isn't to solve the underlying problem.
No, the clinical approach here is distract, relax, cope. You are purposefully buying time for your sympathetic nervous system to cool down.
So your prefrontal cortex can boot back up.
Right. You just want to survive the spike without making the situation any worse.
This brings up a really intense but super common behavioral response. When emotional pain reaches that unbearable threshold, a lot of people turn to physical pain.
Like cutting or other forms of self-harm.
Yeah. And from a neurological standpoint, there's a reason for that, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Physical pain triggers the release of endorphins, which are the body's natural painkillers.
Oh, wow. So it's basically medicating.
Pretty much. It forces a sudden neurochemical shift that temporarily numbs the emotional agony. So the behavior makes biological sense, but obviously it causes severe physical damage.
And long-term psychological harm. So how do we safely hack that biological mechanism without the damage? The clinical data in the workbook points to intense, safe sensory distractions.
Right. If your brain is screaming for a physical sensation to override the emotional one, you give it one safely.
Like squeezing an ice cube in the palm of your hand until it completely melts.
Yes, because the brain only has so much bandwidth. The extreme cold forces your nervous system to process that immediate physical sensation.
Pulling focus away from the emotional loop.
Exactly. Or you can snap a rubber band against your wrist. It provides that sharp sting, triggering a mild endorphin release without actually breaking the skin.
And there's even a visual trick in the text, right?
Yeah. If seeing the self-harm is part of the triggering loop for someone, they can use a red felt tip marker to draw on the skin where they'd normally cut.
It's basically trauma medicine applied to psychology. It's like putting a tourniquet on a wound before you even think about performing surgery. You have to stop the bleeding first.
That's the perfect way to look at it. You can't fix the underlying life issue while the patient is bleeding out.
Right. But let's say you've stopped the bleeding. You survived the immediate spike using the ice cube. If you don't shift your underlying perspective, you're just going to trigger another crisis an hour later.
And this is where we run into the concept of radical acceptance. And what's fascinating here is that fighting the past or judging a painful situation only leads to paralysis.
Okay, let me push back on this right away because this trips up a lot of people. When things are objectively terrible, being told to radically accept it sounds dangerously close to just giving up.
It does sound like that, yeah.
I mean, imagine someone stuck in an abusive relationship. Does radically accepting the reality mean they're condoning the abuse?
Not at all. It's a vital distinction in the text. Accepting reality does not mean you agree with it. It just means you stop arguing with the facts of the present moment.
Stop arguing with the facts.
Okay, let's look at that abusive relationship. Often, victims burn immense amounts of psychological energy asking, why is this happening to me? Or, he wasn't like this yesterday, maybe tomorrow will be different.
They're fighting the reality of the situation.
Right, and that denial creates cognitive paralysis. It drains your energy and keeps you stuck.
So the idea is that pain in life is inevitable, but suffering is what happens when you refuse to accept the pain.
Exactly. When you radically accept the situation, meaning you say, I am in a relationship that is fundamentally harmful to me, and this is my current reality, the illusion drops.
You finally see the board clearly.
Yes, because only when you see the reality of the threat can you take effective strategic action to pack your bags and leave.
Wow. You drop the exhausting fight against reality so you actually have the energy to change it. That leads perfectly into the second pillar, mindfulness. Because once you survive the crisis, you need a way to observe your mind's baseline state, right?
Right, so you don't keep falling into new crises. You have to cultivate mindfulness. In clinical settings, we often refer to John Kabat-Zinn's operational definition.
Which is paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally.
Exactly. It involves what skills, like focusing and recognizing your thoughts, and how skills, which is doing so without judgment. You observe without labeling things as good or bad.
Let's ground this in a practical scenario from the workbook, because it's so easy to get trapped when you lack this skill. Imagine a brilliant, highly successful college professor. Let's call her Takesha.
Okay, Takesha.
At work, her reasonable mind, which processes cold, hard facts and logic, is firing on all cylinders. But in her personal life, she's gone through a few bad breakups, and now she just assumes she's unlovable and resigns herself to total loneliness.
Right, because in her personal life, she's trapped in her emotion mind. Emotion mind distorts reality based purely on the intensity of a feeling.
It totally ignores the objective facts, like the fact that she's a wonderful, capable person.
Yeah, but relying only on reasonable mind is dangerous too, because it ignores the vital data and intuition that our emotions provide. Living exclusively in either state is dysfunctional.
We need both.
We need the synthesis, which DBT calls the wise mind. Wise mind is a higher-order decision-making process. It balances the rational thought of the reasonable mind with the valid emotional needs of the emotion mind.
So you honor the fact that you feel lonely and hurt, but you govern your actions with logic. You don't let the feeling of unworthiness dictate your future.
Exactly.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. There's a classic cognitive exercise used to help find that wise mind, called thought diffusion.
Yes, thought diffusion is incredibly effective. The goal is to stop getting hooked by a negative thought.
So when Takesha thinks I'm a failure, her emotion mind takes that as absolute truth. But with thought diffusion, you visualize that thought as a harmless object, right? Like words or pictures floating away.
Yeah. The most common metaphor is standing on a bridge, looking down at a river, and watching leaves float by on the surface.
So instead of jumping into the freezing water to desperately chase down every single leaf that passes by, you just stand on the bridge.
Right. You acknowledge the leaf, which is your negative thought, and you let the current take it away. You fundamentally change your relationship to your thoughts.
You observe them arising and disappearing without analyzing them or like attaching your identity to them. You are not the leaves, you are the observer on the bridge.
And to stay on that bridge without judging the leaves, you have to approach life with what's known as beginner's mind.
Right, entering every situation as if you're seeing it for the very first time, free of past labels.
Which is incredibly difficult, but once you can objectively observe your thoughts through mindfulness, you can finally start to change them.
Which brings us to the third pillar, emotion regulation, modulating the waves. Because observing the waves doesn't make the storm go away.
No, it doesn't.
So if wise mind helps me observe that my blood is boiling, how do I actually turn the dial down?
Well, the first step is parsing out the initial hit from the avalanche that follows. You have to understand primary emotions versus secondary emotions.
Okay, so a primary emotion is your initial hardwired reaction to an event. Like if a car suddenly swerves into your lane on the highway, you feel a spike of fear.
Right, that is unavoidable, and it's a necessary survival mechanism.
But the secondary emotions are the avalanche. After the car swerves and you feel fear, you might suddenly feel incredibly angry that you were scared.
And then you might feel depressed that you have anger issues, and then you feel guilty about being depressed.
It just never ends.
Exactly. The primary emotion lasts a few seconds. The secondary emotions can cause prolonged suffering that lasts for days or even years.
The Workbook has a great example of the cognitive cycle. Think about a guy named Jim who loses a watch his grandfather gave him. Losing the watch triggers a primary emotion, sadness. Completely natural.
Very natural.
But then his brain offers a trigger thought. I'm such an idiot, I ruin everything. That thought creates a massive secondary emotion of depression. To cope, he goes to a bar and gets drunk.
And the next morning, he feels intense shame, which triggers more negative thoughts.
It's this vicious, self-reinforcing cycle of emotions, thoughts, and behaviors.
But if you intervene at the level of the secondary emotion or the trigger thought, that entire cycle can be dismantled.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second. The text suggests that our tendency toward intense emotions is often hardwired by genetics or early childhood trauma.
Which is often true, yes.
If our emotional responses are that deeply rooted in our neurobiology, how can we possibly break a cycle that intense?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at how emotions manifest physically. Every emotion comes with a specific action urge and body language.
Like, when you feel fear, your biological urge is to retreat. You hunch your shoulders and make yourself small.
Right. And when you feel furious anger, your biological urge is to attack. You tense your fists and raise your voice. But the nervous system is a two-way street. Your brain tells your body how to pose, but your body also sends feedback up to the brain confirming the emotion.
Meaning, if I clench my fists, my brain says, yep, we're definitely angry, keep pumping the adrenaline.
Precisely. So the clinical intervention here is a behavioral technique called opposite action. You intentionally do the exact opposite of what your emotion is screaming at you to do.
So if I'm terrified of a networking event, my urge is to avoid it. Opposite action means I approach the thing I fear.
Yes. Or if you're furious at a coworker, your urge is to yell. Opposite action means you intentionally relax your hands, stand tall, and speak in a soft, slow voice.
By doing that, you are sending new physiological feedback to the brain. You are literally telling the threat detection center, look at our body language. We are relaxed. This old emotion is no longer needed.
You are reverse engineering your nervous system to downregulate the emotion. And then you can pair that behavioral hack with a cognitive intervention, like ABC problem solving.
Which stands for alternatives, best ideas, and commitment.
Yes. When you're regulated enough to think, you brainstorm alternative responses, pick the best idea, and commit to it. And you combine this with cognitive balancing.
Like looking at evidence that contradicts trigger thoughts. Take Ziva from the Workbook, a straight-A student who gets one bad math grade. Her trigger thought is, I'm a total failure.
But cognitive balancing forces you to look at the hard evidence. The evidence is that she has a high GPA, and this was just an unusually difficult test.
You balance the isolated negative event against the broader reality. So we've survived the crisis, observed the mind, and regulated the emotion. Now, how do we take this out into the real world?
That brings us to the final pillar, interpersonal effectiveness. This is the externalization of all the skills.
Meaning the ability to ask for what you want, say no, and negotiate conflict without damaging the relationship or your self-respect.
Which is incredibly hard. When people lack these skills, they fall back on toxic, aversive strategies.
The Workbook lists a bunch of these. Discounting the other person's needs, abandoning the situation, threatening, guilt-tripping, and derailing the conversation.
Those strategies cause deep relational damage. The healthy alternative relies heavily on your mindfulness training, specifically using mindful I statements.
Instead of a judgmental you statement like, you're so selfish, you use self-knowledge. I feel lonely when we don't spend time together.
This raises an important question, though. Even if you know what to say, how do we know how intensely to ask for something?
Oh, the 10-point scale in the text.
Yes. DBT uses a 10-point scale for modulating your intensity based on two variables, the urgency of your need versus the vulnerability of the other person or relationship.
So if your need is a 10 out of 10, like a medical emergency, you don't worry about their vulnerability. Your intensity is at a 10. You scream for help.
Right. But if your need is a 2, you really want your partner to do the dishes, but they just lost their job today, the vulnerability is high. You dial back your intensity.
It's highly calculated empathy,
Yeah.
which perfectly encapsulates the ultimate pragmatism of DBT, doing what's effective.
Yes. Acting appropriately to reach your long-term goal, even if it feels completely unnatural or goes against your emotional urge.
Like staying in a painfully long grocery line when you're annoyed instead of storming out. Because leaving empty-handed only hurts you.
You acknowledge the frustration using wise mind, but you act on the logical goal.
So what does this all mean? Whether you're treating a patient or managing your own high-stress career as a young professional, emotional regulation isn't about suppressing feelings.
No, it's about having a concrete, scientifically backed toolkit to process them.
Exactly. And fulfilling my role as an educational content creator here, I want to give you a short review exercise pulled directly from the Workbook's Daily Mindfulness Regimen.
It's a great way to put this into practice.
Today, I want you to commit to spending just 3 minutes practicing doing tasks mindfully. Pick one mundane task, like washing your hands or walking.
And for those 3 minutes, do it while focusing solely on the physical sensations.
Let the judgments and thoughts float away like leaves on a stream. Just 3 minutes.
And as you do that, consider this final thought. The text notes that these clinical skills are deeply rooted in ancient Eastern meditation practices like Zen and Sufism.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's profound to think about how modern psychology and ancient spiritual wisdom are ultimately trying to solve the exact same human problem, how to suffer less and live fully in the present.
You're pointing to the exact same truth. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. You don't have to let the tsunami sweep you away. We'll catch you on the next one.